Welcome back to the program. So, we're going to talk about lots of different things today, but mostly all about military operations and things like that. But before we get into that, let's also talk about what recently happened. Of course, the switch from the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Now, I can't wait to see all of these liberals out there that are screaming that we're now a Department of War try to attack President Trump for changing the name, because let's not forget it was Harry S. Truman that had the Department of War. Harry S. Truman, by the way, was a Democrat. Harry S. Truman is still to this day the only president of the United States in history that has ever dropped a nuclear bomb. So now we have them defending criminals and gangbangers in their own liberal cities. Now we have them upset that we're taking out narco terrorists and blowing up their boats and all their drugs. And now they're saying that we have a Department of War, but yet they refuse to even acknowledge the fact that that was under a Democrat. So very interesting times that we are living in. But let's talk about this. So we saw what happened with the bomb on that boat, and boom, that was it. 11 narco terrorists are gone. The left is freaking out. They want, funerals for these drug cartel members. How dare you kill people that are trying to kill the American people with their fentanyl and their meth and all the other drugs. And instead, they are going after President Trump. They're calling him a murderer and everything else. Here's the other part of this, okay? This is what's important. When the Supreme Court did the decision to give presidential immunity to all presidents, that's the reason President Trump can even do what he's doing right now, okay? He would never even have been able to take out those narco terrorists without two things. Number one, doing the executive order and changing their designation as narco-terrorist organizations, international drug traffickers and all that. That gives him a lot more options to deal with them. But number two, the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court, God forbid, would have done the opposite and said, sorry, President Trump, even though every single other president in American history, now you don't have presidential immunity, well, then we wouldn't be taking out narco-terrorists. We wouldn't be able to go into Venezuela, as we're probably going to be doing very soon, and dropping bombs on the drug cartels. Why? Because after he gets out of office, he would have then been able to be prosecuted. See, this is the part that liberals don't understand. Presidential immunity works for everyone, Republicans and Democrats. I've said this before when we were talking about it. I also said the Supreme Court was going to do the right thing, which of course they did. But if they didn't, President Trump wouldn't be taking out drug cartels, because they would be obviously using that after he gets out to put him in jail for the rest of his life. Now he has presidential immunity. Presidential immunity is important because it allows the president the freedom to protect us without worrying about being litigated against and criminally prosecuted. That's what this is all about. So, story number one. Trump is considering striking the cartel members inside Venezuela. Now, I would never do pretty much all three of the stories that we're going to do tonight. I wouldn't have done any of them because I am not one that likes to divulge information pertaining to our national security. However, when the New York Slimes does it, when Politico does it, when all these other places do it, and then other people cover it, well, then it's not on me. It's not on my conscience. All I am at that point is just reporting it to all of you. So here's where we're at. Reportedly considering unleashing military strikes inside and directly against drug cartels operating deep inside Venezuela as part of a no-holds-barred strategy to dismantle Nicolas Maduro's regime. Again, it is an illegitimate regime. He came to power. He didn't have a vote. He came to power through Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez died, of course. Hugo Chavez was illegitimate. He stole power, of course, then turned Venezuela into a nightmare and where it is today. He dies. He names his successor. No one said anything. There was no elections at that time. And if there were elections, it wouldn't matter. They were just, for show, because that's how communists work. They steal elections and they stay in power. Well, guess what? When their narco-terrorists are being decimated and the people are still starving and eating their pets and everything else, eventually the people will overthrow a regime. Remember, starvation is a major motivating factor for people to overthrow governments. It's very simple. If you're starving, you've got nothing else to lose. You're going to do whatever you can to destroy the people that are keeping you from being able to eat and live free and everything else. So eventually, that's what happens. All of these communist dictators end up going at some point. Some last a lot longer, like Cuba and things like that, but most of them go pretty quickly. So the consideration comes amid Trump's ongoing war on narco trafficking, which he sees as a direct threat to American security, especially with the flood of drugs pouring across the southern border under the failed Biden-Harris auto pen policies. Citing multiple unnamed sources briefed on the plans, the Communist News Network reported, so again, they're the scumbags that dropped it, on Friday evening, that Trump has greenlit operations to target Venezuelan gangs inside Venezuela, targeted strikes on Venezuelan soil, building on a recent lethal operation that sank the drug smuggling boat that was leaving the country. The U.S. has moved substantial military firepower, missiles, tomahawks, submarines, aircraft, and more than 4,000 U.S. sailors and Marines are now positioned all around and surrounding, for that matter, Venezuela. Two White House officials told CNN advanced F-35 fighter jets are also being sent to Puerto Rico, where a Marine unit is currently conducting amphibious landing and training exercises. I'm telling you, things are going to be happening pretty soon. The administration has taken steps to connect Maduro to its broader anti-drug mission, labeling him as the leader of a narco-terrorist country and these terrorist groups, ties to some of the most recently designated cartels, and doubling the bounty for his arrest or capture to $50 million. The shift will treat cartel operatives as enemy combatants. See, that's the difference. That's why the executive orders that he signed, those 11 executive orders, the one executive order designating these 11 drug cartels as international terrorist organizations, gives him the ability and power to do exactly what he's doing. But if the Supreme Court wouldn't have given him presidential immunity, guess what? Nothing. He wouldn't have been able to do any of this stuff because he'd have to worry about being prosecuted after leaving office. Where am I at? 7 minutes. Okay, good. White House officials emphasized that no final decision has been made just yet regarding the strikes inside Venezuela, but the door remains open and it serves U.S. interests. Secretary of State now, Marco Rubio, was asked on Tuesday if the White House was considering strikes on Venezuela's soil against the Maduro regime, and he did not rule out the possibility. Quote, "This is a counter-drug operation," Rubio said. "We are going to take on these drug cartels wherever they are operating, and against the interests of the United States. Instead of interdicting on the president's orders, we blew up the boat instead. And it'll happen again. Who knows? Maybe it's happening right now," he continued. Marco is just awesome as Secretary of State. One of CNN's sources reportedly said President Trump told national security officials that, quote, "if there is an opportunity to kill terrorists, he will immediately give them the green light to do so. The preferred course of action is for Maduro to leave on his own. However, we don't think he's going to do that. To read the tea leaves," another source who was briefed on the administration's plans told CNN. "And then I think the message is, do you want it to be done the easy way or do you want it to be done the hard way?" There it is. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. When? I don't know. Probably by the end of September, if not maybe even sooner. We'll have to see. But it's not just Venezuela. They're looking at other areas. Mexico, of course, is another one. There's the Sinaloa cartels, the Jalisco cartel. There's, I don't know all the names, but there's a lot of them. So there's that, and they're training there as well. You've, of course, got Venezuela. You've got Honduran gangs. You've got El Salvadorian gangs, although you have a friend there that will actually probably allow you to do it and work with you and even coordinate efforts to get rid of the extra gangs and cartel members that might still be around in El Salvador. I don't think so, though. I think, what's his name, Nukeli or whatever, Nayib Bukele. I think he's done a hell of a job cleaning up El Salvador. I mean, those streets are cleaner than, D.C. or just about the same. So it's going to get interesting, and it's going to get interesting pretty quick. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the program. So the next thing we want to talk about in this segment is fentanyl and, of course, meth and cocaine and all these other crazy drugs that were just seized. And, of course, Judge Jeanine Pirro talked about it. Pam Bondi talked about it. We're talking barrels that would fill football stadiums full of ingredients to make these drugs. I mean, it's unbelievable. Fentanyl financiers. Treasury links Mexican banks and Chinese networks to cartel money laundering. The U.S. Department of the Treasury is stepping up its efforts to identify the ways that drug cartels get to move their product and their funds. Most recently, Treasury officials identified the presence of Chinese money laundering operations and networks that are working with directly the Mexican drug cartels and other criminal entities to move large sums of cash. In a series of, hang on, this print got smaller on me for some reason. Woo, there we go. In a series of notices from the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, authorities warned financial institutions about the methods that these criminal organizations are using to launder money. According to FinCEN Financial Center, investigators reviewed 137,153 Bank Secrecy Act reports from 2020 to 2024, identifying $312 billion in suspicious transactions tied to Chinese money laundering operations. Of significant concern to FinCEN is the apparent ties between these Mexican drug cartels and these Chinese money laundering groups. The report comes just weeks after FinCEN and the United States Treasury sanctioned 2 Mexican banks and 1 brokerage firm that they believe had been laundering money for various drug cartels and had also been helping funnel money into China to pay for fentanyl precursors. The ties between drug cartels and Chinese groups are fueled in part by currency laws in both Mexico and China, which limit the amount of U.S. dollars that can be deposited and moved in Mexico, as well as China's control of international currency within its country. Treasury officials claim that money laundering groups from China buy U.S. dollars from drug cartels and then sell them further ahead to Chinese individuals or businesses who are trying to evade China's cash control laws. The money laundering operations rely on U.S.-based Chinese nationals. Again, this is why President Trump is wrong. We do not want 300,000 of these Chinese students to be in this country. Hell, get them all out, okay? I would literally, what's that word when you pinpoint somebody? I can't think of the word right now. It'll come to me. But I want to focus on these people. I want to surveil these people. Anyone that has come from China in the last 15, 20 years should be focused and they should be surveilled. FBI should be searching them. They should be looking at their social media. They should be going into their businesses, no-knock warrants, checking their books, checking their communications, their emails, everything. Every single one of these students should be surveilled. Every single one of them. They really shouldn't even be here at all. Because China is not a friend. China can't be trusted. China is our mortal enemy. And China is the greatest existential threat to the United States of America and all of humanity. So anyway, the money laundering groups rely on the U.S.-based nationals to make regular cash deposits in an attempt to counter this tactic. Authorities warn banks to be on the lookout for Chinese students, again, retired individuals, housewives, laborers who begin making large cash deposits without having a way to prove the source of income. So again, this is what they are doing. China has been waging a secret war against the United States for decades. And every one of these idiots in office just continue to placate to them, continue to look the other way, continue to just sell out for money and cash. I mean, it's so ridiculous. President Trump seems to be aware and taking it serious, but why on earth would he allow these 300,000 or 400,000? And they said it was 600, but it's actually 300,000. Why would you allow these kids? What benefit do these Chinese nationals that are likely spies for the CCP, what benefit do they have for our country? Literally none, okay? Deport every single one of them, okay? Profiling was the word I was looking for earlier. I want to be profiling these Chinese students. I want to profile Chinese business owners. I don't give a shit if you run a Chinese restaurant or a laundromat. I want to surveil you. I want to profile you because I don't trust your loyalty to this country, and I don't care how long you've been here either. And yes, I'll say it publicly. You all have to go. Until we can figure out and get rid of the regime and the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping and all these terrorists, which are financing all of this stuff, until we can get rid of that regime, get a new regime that is more pro-Western, that we can actually maybe work with in the future one day, forget it. You can't be here. You can't be here. We can't trust you. And so that's why we need to stop this nonsense, this madness. We just found out all of this money, billions of dollars, the biggest drug bust ever for fentanyl and methamphetamines coming from China, from Shanghai, directly into Mexico that we were able to get. So think about what that's doing financially for the Chinese, right? Think of the money that they're getting. This goes around sanctions and everything else, right? So they are relying on this billions upon billions of dollars through the drug cartels because their goal is to kill us, okay? They want us dead, and they're willing to do it through poisoning our children, poisoning American citizens with their drugs, and their financing of all this methamphetamines and all these other crazy drugs. So you know what? President Trump goes in, takes out Venezuela, takes out Mexico, takes out all these drug cartels. Now China is sitting there, and they don't have nearly as much money. And as I said, if the people in China would finally, rise up and realize that there's way more of them than there are of the CCP, then perhaps in the future, for decades, centuries even of years to come, we could possibly have more world peace. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the program. Okay, so for this last segment for tonight, again, I would never have even talked about this if it wasn't for the New York Slimes bloviating all over the place and spewing this everywhere. Again, if I hear something that I know could cause us a problem with national security, I'm not going to talk about it. And hopefully no one else will. But that's not how it works, because these people hate Trump, they hate America, and they want to do whatever they can to put us in more conflicts. Well, thank you, New York Slimes, because here's another one that they did. The New York Slimes says that in 2019, so again, under President Trump's presidency, SEAL Team 6 mission to North Korea ended in failure with civilian murders. Now, is this because they hate Trump so much that they dropped this story because they know that it hurts him and they don't care about our national security? Well, certainly seems that way. So here it is. In early 2019, blow up the print here. SEAL Team 6 Red Squadron embarked on a covert mission that fell apart and cost lives. deep into North Korean territory to place a covert communications listening device, one of the riskiest operations in recent U.S. military history, according to the New York Slimes. The goal was to plant a communications interception device to monitor the country's dictator Kim Jong-un's private communications. The mission was, according to the Times, personally approved at the highest levels, with then President Donald Trump allegedly giving the green light. He's come out and said, I don't know what you're talking about. So this could all be bullshit. It could all be fake news. I mean, it's coming from the New York Slimes, right? They're known for fake news, so keep that in mind. The covert mission was happening at the same time that Washington was seeking peace deals with the communist country. The operation was born out of frustration within U.S. intelligence circles. Despite years of sanctions and surveillance, obtaining reliable intelligence on North Korea's nuclear and missile programs remained difficult to obtain. Planners believed that a direct insertion of highly trained operatives might succeed where satellites, drones, and other remote methods had failed. The SEAL team deployed from a nuclear-powered submarine using stealth mini-submarines to reach the North Korean coastline in the dead of night. Temperatures were near freezing, and the team had trained for months in similar conditions. Every single detail was rehearsed to minimize exposure, including strict radio silence and precise timing. Despite the meticulous planning, the mission quickly went wrong. As the SEALs approached the shore, a North Korean fishing boat came into view. Believing that they had been spotted, the SEAL team opened fire. What they encountered, however, were not armed soldiers, but unarmed fishing civilians diving for shellfish. Reports indicate that 2 to 3 of these civilians were killed almost instantly. In interviews, members of SEAL Team 6 defended the use of violence against civilians as inherently permitted due to the nature of these operations. The SEALs reportedly attempted to conceal the deaths. According to sources, the team punctured the victims' lungs so that the bodies would then sink, then withdrew without planting their surveillance devices. The mission ended in failure. Allegedly, Congress was never told about the mission, nor was President Trump. Now, I don't know if this is even a true story. Again, it's from the New York Slimes, okay? Take that with a grain of salt. They're about as, reliable as, nothing, basically, as Hillary Clinton, holding onto your emails. President Trump has said to reporters that he was not told about the operation. President Trump, when asked about the operation after reports surfaced, denied having prior knowledge. Quote, I'm hearing about it now for the first time, he told reporters. The secrecy surrounding the operation has raised significant legal and ethical questions. Covert military actions of this type are typically required to be reported to congressional intelligence committees. Well, let's think for a second. Who was running Congress at the end there? I can't remember. Was it Republicans? I'm not sure. It might have been Democrats, and you certainly don't want to tell them anything having to do with intelligence. This mission, however, was not disclosed, leaving lawmakers and the public unaware of a deadly operation sanctioned at the executive level. It also brings into question who was authorizing these military operations that risked starting a war, of which also end up taking human lives, as allegedly happening in this story involving North Korea. At the time, we had traitor Maoist Milley, right, who actually said on a recording, oh, China, by the way, his Chinese counterpart, don't worry, if we're going to do a preemptive strike against you or against Wuhan or against any, of your facilities or anything, I'll let you know first. Sorry, Milley, but that's treason, okay? That is treason, and you should be charged with that. So I don't know. There was a lot of subversives. You had Mad Dog Mattis, who was against Trump. You had so many of these other people that were against Trump, that were undermining him. Perhaps maybe they were working on some of these things without even telling him. I mean, you had a whole entire thing where they were just not listening to the commander-in-chief. I mean, think of how dangerous that is. Not only is it subversion and insubordination, it's treason. And they should be prosecuted. Every single person that made a move without the president's okay and did it without permission, they ought to be charged. Okay? So I don't know. Is this even a true story? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. But the bottom line is, it was in 2019. Why bring it up now? Why exacerbate issues and problems now? Why enrage the psychotic, pot-bellied dog eater and junkyard dog of China to a point where maybe he would try to do something because he's hearing about this? What good does this do for us? None. You know what it does? It undermines us. It undermines President Trump. It undermines our, Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. It makes things harder. It makes negotiations harder. It makes peace negotiations harder because now there's distrust when these types of things come out. The good news is that North Korea may have nuclear weapons, but they don't have launching pads. They don't have the ability to get, thank God, those nuclear weapons, even 30 or 40 miles, let alone thousands of miles, okay? Every single time they try something, it ends up right in, the water right outside of like Japan or, whatever, one of the areas around there. China, South China Sea, that's where it goes. It doesn't fly, 4,000 miles or anything like that. Thank God it doesn't. So from that standpoint, they have the technology, but they don't have the ability to use it. But what happens if they continue on and on and on? And now they think, oh, they're trying to spy on us and everything else. They're going to exacerbate it even more. Look, I've said this before for years, and I'll say it again. We have never had an official declaration to end the Korean War. Okay? You folks know that. The Korean War technically never ended. So for generations upon generations upon generations, right? The North Koreans have taught their children that the Americans are bloodthirsty monsters. They're hiding in your closet. They're going to come here and eat your babies. I mean, this is the sick, demented stuff that they teach their people to keep them under control so that they can continue their hate against the West. That's what they do, right? It's called juche. That's their ideology. So why not just say, you know what? Let's just end the war. Remember, they signed a 1953 armistice, which was a peace agreement to just stop the war. So in other words, like a ceasefire. It was not an official declaration to end the war. It was a ceasefire. So why don't we just sign a declaration to end the war? And maybe some of this, vitriol and hatred would subside. Probably not, because now, sadly, we had a stolen election in South Korea, and now Seoul is being run by Chi-Com communists, okay? So who knows? Now we used to have South Korea as a strong ally, not anymore, okay? Now you have North Korea right next to them, and then you have China. So now you have a three-headed monster because they allowed in South Korea the South Korean election to be stolen. And no doubt they used probably some of the same tactics that they learned from America's Democrats. Oh, they should be so proud of themselves. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.